Hello and welcome to Lesson 5 in the Be Safe in Your Space for Preteens program. I'm Gary Simmons. Last week we examined how to discover a troublemaker's motivation and weaknesses, how the ego can potentially be troublemaker number one or your greatest ally. We looked at some strategies about coaching those kids who tend to get into trouble due to an overdeveloped need to be at the center of attention. What you can do if your child may have the potential to become a troublemaker. We examined how to coach your child to develop more friendships, how to coach your child to communicate in a positive and effective way to help build confidence and self-esteem. We looked at how to help your child appreciate the importance of empathy and how they can develop it. We discussed what is the carrot or the stick principle and how you can utilize it to help your child change difficult behavior. And there were some practical tips if your child is struggling with issues such as being excluded. And then we looked at how you can teach your kids how to compartmentalize their life and friends to help them have relationships with people who enhance their lives and not detract from it. In today's lesson, we'll be looking at some of the more advanced techniques to help you be safe in your space, such as some of the differences between girl troublemakers and boy troublemakers, the issues around physical violence, the exact moment when the threat of violence becomes actual violence, the difference between self-defense and fighting, how much violence is ethical to use and when, a key black belt fighting concept and how it can be applied non-violently into everyday life. There's some simple and effective defensive-only moves that anyone of any age can quickly learn and use. We'll look at what is passive bullying and how you can teach your child to recognize it and avoid it. There's the importance of developing your child's emotional intelligence. And then what's the differences between teasing, being rude, and bullying, and how to explain this to your child. And how to gradually move away from a negative peer group so no one else notices. How to lose face and how to gain it and why it's so important. We're going to look at what is the invisible treatment and how to teach it to your child and how to use the carrot or the stick when dealing with an unprovoked troublemaker. So let's get started with Lesson 5. Over the last 20 years, I've been looking at a lot of research about bullying. According to one recent US study, which I think is indicative for any modern Western country, the main forms of bullying that kids aged 10 to 14 tend to experience are as follows. At 44.2%, there's name calling. 43.3% is teasing. 36.3% is spreading rumors or lies. 32.4% is pushing or shoving. 29.2% is hitting, slapping, or kicking. Excluding is 28.5%. Threatening is 27.4%. Stealing belongings is 27.3%. And sexual comments or gestures is 23.7%. As these statistics indicate, although non-physical and emotional bullying is prevalent among kids, physical bullying such as pushing and shoving, hitting, kicking, or slapping, as well as threatening, are also very real and significant, particularly for boys. As a matter of interest, before we move on, some other relevant statistics about bullying include 25 to 33% of 10 to 14-year-olds experience bullying. 10% of kids have been the victims of severe bullying. 10% of kids have been bullied at least once a week. 15 to 35% of young teens have experienced some sort of cyberbullying, including texting, email, and social media. The study also went on to show that compared to their peers, kids with attention issues are more likely to have trouble with bullying. For example, kids with learning challenges are more likely to be bullied. Kids with ADHD are more likely to be victimized or left out. And kids with ADHD are more likely to bully other kids. So I'd like to begin today's lesson by exploring the differing modus operandi between a girl and a boy troublemaker, as well as some of the associated issues and tactics for dealing with them. Of course, at this point, I do need to qualify that there are always going to be exceptions to each person and circumstance. But having said that, there are definitely some commonalities in the social interactions and problems that can arise from the way each gender behaves. So let's start with the boys. Generally, boys tend to be physical and in the moment, and their bullying is face-to-face. For the most part, they're too busy discovering and testing out their strength and agility to be conniving and surreptitious with each other. With boys, it's an insult here, a laugh there, a push and a shove, or maybe the odd punch or two. Their trouble is mostly direct and upfront. Also, a boy troublemaker will quite happily pick on other boys as well as girls. Before I started this Be Safe in Your Space program, parents of boys and their kids usually approached me for advice about what to do long after the initial harassment phase was over and their child was actually dealing with physical violence or the constant threat of it. So we've just touched on the rough and tumble and physicality of boys, but I'd like to take a few minutes to sidetrack a little here and touch on the delicate subject and issues that surround physical violence and self-defense. Think about it. With the exception of being excluded, the main leverage that a troublemaker has over their intended victim is the real or imagined threat of physical violence. Most people in our politically correct and litigation-obsessed society find it very difficult to ever justify using violence at any time. If you're somewhere in this category, consider that to physically sting an assailant to a degree that will deter them from hurting you or a loved one is a perfectly natural thing to do. Some of the cutest animals in nature who are never associated with having violent tendencies, such as bunny rabbits and pandas and koalas, will fight tooth and nail, even to the death, if they're cornered or feel sufficiently threatened. There's no doubt that the decision to use violence is a very serious issue and can never be taken lightly. As we've touched on throughout this program, there are major ramifications surrounding the use of violence. In Lesson 1, we looked at how all physical encounters with a troublemaker are a lose-lose situation, no matter who we are, because the chances of walking away from a physical encounter completely unscathed in either body, mind, or spirit are very slim. We also examined how violence will inevitably inflame a situation because violence invariably leads to more violence. In the context of being safe in your space, knowing how to fight back in order to take flight is okay. However, it's critical that you and your child are able to distinguish the difference between a self-defense and having a fight. If, for example, a disagreement or altercation starts off verbally and escalates into a physical exchange from both parties, it's then a fight. A self-defense move is ideally a one-off technique that facilitates an escape, as opposed to defeating an attacker personally, as in a fight. By being unprovoked and in this escape or prevention mode, frame of mind, it's then morally justifiable to deploy any means possible to achieve this objective. Another important point about using a violent self-defense move is that legally and morally, it's only okay to use enough violence to control an attack. This means it's not okay to go on and on, to continue to beat up someone due to anger despite the provocation or the temptation to do so. It's impossible and irresponsible for me, or anyone else for that matter, to say, if you do this move at this time, you'll be safe. The main identifiable factor in successfully dealing with a physical attack, at least in theory, is the level of your training. Therefore, my best advice for countering a physical attack is to avoid a physical confrontation any way possible, no matter who you are, nor how justified retaliatory violence might seem at the time. But what do? I hear you ask. If I'm faced with a violent attack despite having tried to avoid it, or what if I'm cornered or trapped? These are key questions, and to be honest, no course, program, or book can provide a definitive answer to all scenarios. Fighting skills, black belt strategies, physical expression, and verbal tricks may all be of use, but at the end of the day, there's only one technique that I guarantee will save you in 99% of all unprovoked physical attacks. And it's called the run for it maneuver. That is, run for it. Having said that, As an absolute last resort in order to control an attack, there can be certain times when resorting to a physical move with the intention of minimizing potential harm may be necessary. For example, a vicious, debilitating self-defense move could be appropriate if a woman encounters a troublemaker who intends to sexually assault her. These types of predatory troublemakers actively seek out targets who they perceive to be conveniently passive and unlikely to cause them any unwanted trouble or resistance. A preemptive strike in conjunction with a lot of associated noise may well be the appropriate strategy in a situation like this, because it gives the potential violent troublemaker the resistance and attention that they're hoping to avoid, thus making it more likely they'll discontinue their attack and flee. The secret for a successful self-defense move is a combination of factors that include confidence in your own ability, the effectiveness and appropriateness of a chosen technique, and the element of surprise. This is another reason why martial arts skills and training are so popular with people of all ages and from all walks of life. By knowing how to deal with a last resort attack, martial arts practitioners then know what to look out for and what to subsequently avoid. This has a flow-on effect of greatly reducing all sorts of conflict within their lives as a whole. I believe this is a really important concept, and I'd like to explore it in a little more detail, how it's possible for you to utilize one of the key fighting tactics of martial arts non-violently in everyday life, so you can, over time, teach and empower your child to do the same. Taekwondo championships have been designed to make all variables as equal as possible. To that end, each championship is divided up into divisions, including gender and weight divisions, to ensure that each competitor's size is equal, because a good big fighter will nearly always defeat a good smaller fighter. There's also different belt color divisions to ensure that the competitors have similar experience, because a black belt will nearly always defeat a blue belt. As well as this, there are different age divisions, including junior, intermediate, open, and veterans. When it comes to fighting within the competitive arena, a 16-year-old will nearly always defeat a 13-year-old, and a 26-year-old will nearly always defeat a 42-year-old. The idea behind having all of these divisions is to allow the best practitioners to win, and not just the biggest, oldest, or youngest competitors. Back in the day when I was a national Taekwondo referee, I used to stand literally centimeters away from full contact black belt action. I was in a position where I could see every nuance within a fight. I was able to see how victorious champions use an indirect, non-physical ability to manipulate and control a vanquished opponent. I noticed how champions have a shrewd ability to recognize and act on any weakness or doubt an opponent may show in their eyes or in their demeanor. Champions know how to create opportunities to attack and how to utilize well-practiced little tactics to put pressure on an opponent. For coaches and athletes, this discipline is known as match management, which is the skill of knowing how to control a space to maximum advantage by appearing dominant. The goal is to frustrate and rattle an opponent so that they feel submissive. The concept is very subtle, yet it's often the difference between a great champion and just another runner-up. Versions of this can be seen in other sports, such as football, when one team appears to be confident, in control and dominating, while a submissive team is just the opposite. Match management can be adopted into everyday life by using your wits while under pressure to manipulate a troublemaker into backing down non-violently before an encounter with them deteriorates into a last resort. Match management is a refined example of utilizing the brain to be safe in your space. Also, in an unavoidable last resort, match management is the skill of being in the correct position at precisely the right moment to launch a devastatingly effective self-defense move. When it comes to self-defense, timing is nearly everything. Attempting a move too early in a last resort may inflame a situation, while being too late may lead to an unnecessary injury. Therefore, being able to accurately assess the situation in bodyguard mode and knowing how to utilize timing to create an advantage is also very important. Knowing exactly when a potential troublemaker becomes an actual troublemaker and knowing the right moment to use physical violence is always going to be difficult. To clarify this critical issue, we firstly need to make an important distinction between potential and actual trouble. Unprovoked violence begins at the precise moment when a troublemaker first crosses over our neutral zone and begins to physically move towards us with the intention of making malicious physical contact. I call this instant in time when a troublemaker moves that first millimeter over the neutral zone as the action point. To be effective, this moment in time or action point is the precise split second when a self-defense move must be applied. If you go to the Be Safe in Your Space download page, you'll see a video called Be Safe in Your Space Live, where I explain the concept of the action point in more detail. And this is going to be a part of this week's homework. When an unprovoked troublemaker attempts intimidation or shows aggression before the action point, they're physically harmless because from this distance, they can only use talk, posturing, and theatrics, which are the things that only an insecure ego takes offense at. The main challenges when faced with intimidation or antagonism is to refrain from premature action, as well as being able to coolly anticipate, recognize, and be prepared for an impending action point. When it comes to physical violence, this is the key. If and when a troublemaker does cross the action point to attack, there are only two options available: fight or flight. As I constantly recommend throughout this program, if it's all possible, choose the flight option. But what about the fight option? Well, since this is a program specifically designed to help preteens deal with harassment and aggression non-violently, for the reasons we just touched on, I'm reticent to advocate the use of any serious self-defense moves here in this forum. However, as I mentioned in lesson 3, the best alternative to using violence is one of my favorite techniques, which I call the vocal shock. Having said that, there are a few simple and very effective martial arts moves called blocks, which are strictly defensive and can be used by anyone to stop an attacker from either grabbing or hitting you. In fact, if used correctly, a block can be a significant deterrent for a troublemaker because they reverse the energy of a blow back onto the attacking troublemaker, which causes them pain every time they try to hurt you, which is a typical carrot or the stick scenario. There's 4 basic blocks, including rising block, low block, outside block, and inside block. And they're suitable defensive techniques for anyone of any age. The principle behind using blocks is if a troublemaker tries to grab or hit you or your child, you block them and use the run for it maneuver. Your other homework for this week will be to practice some blocks with your child. And don't worry, I'll post some videos to help you learn how. It's critical to understand that all successful self-defense moves require a corresponding amount of timing, balance, speed, coordination, and general physical fitness. Being proficient in basic self-defense is yet another classic example of being responsible for yourself, because no one else can learn or practice the moves on your behalf. It's you who has to do the work. I'm glad we're able to discuss some of the issues that surround physical violence. Now, let's get back on track and examine how different bullying amongst girls is compared to boys. We've discussed how boy troublemakers tend to be in the moment. However, girl troublemakers can be very adept at being calculating and planning their use of emotional attacks and harassment. Typically, girls mainly target other girls and tend to use subtle tactics such as alienation, derision, and spreading rumours. They tend to favour passive bullying techniques. Often with girls, this passive bullying can occur within so-called friendships. So let's put passive bullying on the table here and look at how it can be explained to both girls and, of course, boys. Some examples of passive bullying are as follows. Preventing someone from participating in a group activity or game. That could sound like, "You can't play here with us, Susie. No one wants you on their team." Another is deliberately excluding someone from a group activity or game, which could be, we're going to play elastics with Jessica now and you can't come because she doesn't like you. The other one is refusing to work with a fellow classmate. I don't want to work with Susie on this. She's so dumb. Another one is refusing to sit next to someone at lunch. Can you move over? I don't want to sit next to Susie. Her lunch stinks. Then there's eye rolling at another person's comments. That's so dumb, Susie. Such an idiot. Laughing at someone due to their differences and uniqueness. Your hair is so frizzy, isn't it, Susie? It looks like steel wool. And then there's using sarcasm when speaking to another. Susie certainly looks very pretty today, for a whale. The reason why passive bullying is so debilitating is because it usually involves the pack. When the right moment presents itself, gently initiate a conversation with your child where you explain the dynamics of passive bullying and the concepts of the pack mentality. Then go on to explain how invariably a pack is always led by an alpha leader whose main mission in life is to manipulate their cohorts to do their bidding, such as singling out a target to pick on. For example, if a leader who we'll call Jessica says, "You're so fat and ugly, Susie, get away from us." Invariably, the Jessicas of the world usually have 2 or 3 best friends who suck up to Jessica because Jessica has somehow tricked them into thinking that she is really cool. Although these so-called best friends of Jessica pretend that they're not troublemakers because they don't really start anything, they really are, because they're making the damage to Susie a whole lot worse. Explain how the reason Jessica does this is because she needs other people around her to approve what she's doing so she can gain the maximum amount of attention, even if it is bad, chi draining, or negative attention. Also point out that without the approval of her cohorts, Jessica would only be a mean, angry, and lonely individual who everyone would strive to avoid. So that's why she's so invested in surrounding herself with mean friends. One of the worst things that passive bullies that hang around Jessica can do is whisper about what Jessica said or done to Susie to other people, so that Susie can see that more and more people are laughing and smiling about her, because it plays right into Jessica's hands. She gets everything she wants. So wouldn't it be good if everybody at school thought that bullying was one of the worst things that one person could do to another? So instead of laughing, the kids might say, "Hey, that's not okay, Jessica. That's so mean. You better apologize to Susie now, otherwise we don't want you hanging around with us." Another really bad form of passive bullying is when Jessica gets someone to be her messenger between her and Susie. This is bad because it creates even more attention and drama for Jessica, which again makes things a whole lot worse for Susie. If anyone wants you to be the go-between, just tell them to sort it out yourselves. Some of the other passive bullying tactics include giving someone the silent treatment, making a friend pick sides in a disagreement, trying to stop people from becoming friends. Now that we've examined what passive bullying is, let's look at how you can coach your child, how they can recognize it, and how they can avoid it by instigating a discussion or conversation about some of these tactics. There's 2 approaches for this. The first way is if you're explaining this concept in general terms to your child, or if they've been a victim of these kinds of behaviours. The second approach is if your child has been a perpetrator of this behaviour, or if you notice that they're modelling themselves on a negative influence. As we discussed last week, I found that the best way to address negative behaviour in a conversation is to direct the discussion in a way where the child gets to empathise with the action in question, instead of just saying, "You shouldn't do that, Susie," or "Don't do that, Johnny." For example, in my martial arts school, we do a lot of high fives. Inevitably, some exuberant preteen boys will always go over the top and try to slam everyone's hand. When my team sees this, they pull the child aside and have a discreet conversation along the lines of, "Hey, I've noticed that when you give other kids high fives, Johnny, you do it really hard. Do you think that the other kids are going to like you doing that?" "No." "Well, why not?" They'll say either A, because it might hurt them, Or B, I don't know. For B, we say, imagine if one of those instructors here were to slam your hand like that. Do you think it would hurt? Oh, yes, it would. No one likes to be hurt. I don't. Do you like being hurt? No. In fact, people who hurt other people are not liked very much. This makes it hard for them to make friends. Would you like people to like you so you can make some more friends? Yes. Good. I'd like you to as well because I can tell you're really nice. So can you show me a better way to give a high five? Ah, yes, that's much better. Well done. It's far better to interact with a child in this way because you get to listen to them, which they love. You get to show them that you care. You let them know that you believe in them and that you don't hold grudges. This will allow them to release the grip of their ego and relate to you and others in an open and honest way. Once you can communicate at this level, it becomes far easier to impress on them how important it is to not be a follower and do things that you know are not right just because the other kids are doing it. As we touched on, laughing at someone within the context of being a troublemaker is a typical passive and emotional bullying tactic. Try saying something along the lines of, have you seen those kids who laugh when they see someone who's either been called names, being pushed around, or is sad from the way they've been treated? Think about it. The kids who do this are just as bad, if not worse, than the actual troublemakers. This is one of the worst types of bullying for making people feel alone, without friends, and miserable. If you see someone who's sad from being treated in this way, the right thing to do would be to go and talk to this person rather than keep hanging out with the people who made her feel sad in the first place. Then explain the ramifications of gossiping and the spreading of rumours along the lines of, when someone tells you something about someone else, it's not okay for you to repeat this to other people, especially if it's something mean. That's called spreading rumours, and it's very destructive. The best thing you can do when someone does this is to reply with, oh, whatever, I don't know. And then you have to quickly change the subject to something positive, as though the rumour was never mentioned. Do you want to practice it with me? You tell a rumour first and make it a really bad one. It's also worth mentioning to your child how it's the same when you're online and you see something posted about someone that you know is not very nice. If you go ahead and like it, you're giving the bully power, and indirectly you're becoming an online bully yourself. Would you like that to happen? Throughout this program, I've touched on the importance of developing your child's emotional intelligence, which is a concept that was first coined in the mid-1960s by psychologist Michael Beldock. Emotional intelligence can be defined as the ability to monitor one's own and other people's emotions, to discriminate between different emotions and label them appropriately, and to use emotional information to guide thinking, choices, and behaviour. In Lesson 1, I also discussed how the term bully is bandied around a lot and has lost some of its context. Consequently, a person could think that they're being bullied when they're actually not. Or in some situations, a person could be unjustly labelled as being a bully. So at what point does some good-natured fun or teasing amongst friends degenerate into being actual bullying and harassment? I'd now like to look at how you can help your child to develop their emotional intelligence so they may understand how important this concept is, so they know how to differentiate between good-natured teasing, a conflict, meanness, and full-fledged bullying. This knowledge can also help to build their resilience. So let's start with teasing. An example of teasing on a personal level could be if someone had a sister who just loved teddy bears and had dozens of them in her room. And they heard their mum ask, "So what would you want for your birthday, Susie?" Teasing could be saying something like, "How about a teddy bear? Susie could do with another one because she only has 20. Mum said, "Oh, that's not a bad idea. How about I get you a teddy bear, Susie?" Teasing within a group could be when friends get together and everyone's having fun playing soccer, and an opposing team member misses a shot at goal and someone yells out, "Nice one, you losers are going down." Teasing is a bit of a joke. No offence is meant and none's taken. Everyone is participating and no one is being singled out with the aim to make them upset or look stupid. A conflict is different. This is when people are having an argument due to a disagreement. It's an even situation. It's when someone does something wrong by saying something out of line, such as, "Your art, Peter's rubbish." "Get back, dickhead, I was first in line." Although these are not nice things to say, disagreements like this can be sorted out quite easily with a simple apology. Meanness is different again. This is when someone reacts excessively from a strong emotion or says something mean and unprovoked from their ego. For example, if for whatever reason someone's having a bad day and is constantly complaining, and a friend says something along the lines of, "Susie, you've been whining about that all day. We're sick of hearing about it." Then if Susie were upset and her ego was in control, she might reply back along the lines of, "Shut up, Jessica. I'm sick of seeing your ugly face." Although this is a horrible thing to say, it's an isolated mean event because Susie is feeling emotional and really didn't intend to be mean to Jessica. Susie spoke through her ego, which is not good if it happens all the time. However, because we're all human, this can and does happen to us all. An isolated mean event can also be worked out with a sincere apology. As we've discussed throughout this program, bullying is when an unprovoked person or persons deliberately attack someone physically, socially, or emotionally with the intention of deliberately causing physical or emotional pain and suffering over a period of time. Or if they have deliberately target someone who they have a hold of by either being bigger, older, or in more numbers. Another very effective strategy for being able to avoid connecting or interacting with a troublemaker is a technique which I call the invisible treatment. This is a strategy of not acknowledging a troublemaker in any way, shape, or form as though they are literally invisible. In the adult world, this technique is particularly useful if you were to ever be confronted with potential road rage. For example, troublemakers who vent their negative personality traits and emotions from behind the wheel of a motor vehicle often have a penchant for attention. You know the type. They have hotted up cars and look for every opportunity to rev their motors and screech their tyres. One way of throwing cold water on harassment is to treat a road rager as though they are invisible. This means not buying into their attention-seeking antics and giving them any acknowledgement or subsequent satisfaction. Pretend that in your world, they don't exist. This can be achieved by being neutral and showing no outward signs of anger or fear, despite what you may be feeling on the inside. To a troublemaker, this unresponsiveness will be boring, and this is a good impression to make at the start of a relationship with any troublemaker. This is also a good tactic for kids if they ever find themselves in a situation where a troublemaker and their cohorts are constantly on their case and trying to make them feel bad. You can explain it like this. Have you ever seen a group of kids who really go out of their way to make someone feel really bad? If that happens, a good way around it is to give them the invisible treatment, where you pretend that no matter what they do or say, they're invisible to you. The reason why this is a good technique is because when troublemakers gang up on a person, they have this weird idea that by being mean and making someone upset is fun. So the best way to deal with them is to take their fun away. If you ever feel like this is happening to you, the first thing that you do is start the power pause breathing. This helps to bring your attention away from them by thinking about your breath going in and out. Next, as you keep on breathing like this, you make sure that you don't connect with your eyes. So look at something that's in the distance, that's either next to them or away from them. It's also important not to speak to them in any way and to pretend that you're preoccupied by doing something menial, such as sharpening a pencil or checking your bag or doing some texting. If you keep your breathing going and maintain this position, one of two things will happen. Firstly, they'll become so bored with your reactions, they'll move on and find someone else to annoy. Secondly, they'll increase their antics, which will be noticed by more people and give you more incriminating evidence to report them. As we discussed in lesson 1, you might have to journal this first and report it later. The invisible treatment does take quite a bit of confidence and courage to do, but if you like, we can practice it together. If you like, you can pick on me first, and I'll give you the invisible treatment, and you can see what I mean, and then I'll pick on you. How does that sound? I should mention that if, for whatever reason, if you do have to say something, to slowly look up from what you're doing to keep you distracted and say, or, I'm not sure, or whatever. These types of conversations can then lead into an important discussion about the people who your child chooses to be around, namely their peers. If your child's having some problems by being involved in a negative peer group, explain how if they look around the playground, they'll see lots of groups, including big groups as well as smaller groups within those groups. Work with them and ask your child to carefully look around for a few days, and then at the end of the week, as an experiment, together you'll make a list of all the different groups who they can see. Explain how the noisiest, loudest, meanest people are always easiest to notice because that's what they like and want because they have insecure egos. Then, coach your child to observe the more low-key groups around and to watch them and to see if they play games, laugh and have fun. Of course they will, right? Once your child can see this, your aim is to coach them to gradually cultivate some friendships away from the group that's causing the problems with some of the other less aggressive groups. In the early days of the strategy, the key factor here is to reassure your child that they don't have to do anything drastic like ditching their old group. The idea is to gradually start to increase the amount of friends they have in different cliques to give them some options for when things become difficult around the existing peers. Also, reassure them that no one else need know what they're doing and how the other kids probably won't notice anyway because they're too busy thinking, me, I. And then the benefit of doing this is that the other nice friends who are in the original group, who no doubt feel the same way as you about the mean kids, will soon realise that you're starting to have some fun with other nicer people, and then they'll want to join you anyway. Speaking of ego, there's another very important concept for knowing how to be safe in your space that involves the ego. I'm referring to the notion of face. The feeling or the belief of losing face is another key component in knowing how to be safe in your space because it can be a very powerful force and a common reason why some individuals become troublemakers or even resort to violence. In the adult world, taken to its extreme, some people would rather die or go to jail than lose face. Troublemakers motivated or driven by a feeling of losing face are potentially some of the nastiest types to be around. To be safe in your space, it's vital to control or manage an unpleasant or dangerous situation so that no one loses face. That's you or the troublemaker. Although face can seem intangible, it's nevertheless a very real and a potent force, motivation, and subtext for a lot of individuals that you and your child will inevitably meet right throughout your lives. Because of the complexity of face and its associated issues, I therefore think it's best if we talk about this concept as adults so you can fully grasp the concept, and then as your child develops emotionally and intellectually, you can then gradually explain it to them over time. So, what is face? Face is an abstract and complex idea involving many subtle nuances. Consider the concept of chivalry in medieval times, where the level of honour, pride, reputation and respect a person had was critical in determining their place in society and consequent success or well-being. In today's world, face is a fusion of keeping up appearances, having street credibility, a code of correctness, respect, and a socially appropriate way to behave. There are strict face protocols governed by either a person's or their family status and the degree to which other people appreciate the status. The more status a person has, the more face they have, and the more face they can lose. An example of face in relation to status occurs amongst the glitz of the film world. It's not uncommon for the tabloid media to report on the antics of spoilt movie stars who throw temper tantrums and go on the attack when they discover that another lesser star has a higher star billing or a cash advance or a larger mobile dressing trailer. Another example of face in everyday life could be at any workplace where a subordinate discusses a sensitive issue with a senior superior instead of their immediate superior responsible for the problem in question. If the immediate superior inadvertently found out that their subordinate went over their head, they could feel humiliated and hostile, believing that they have lost face with the senior superior. Face is also a major influence in many of the subcultures within our community, such as street gangs or even sports teams. Face is also a major factor in peer group pressure. Basically, a fragile ego or a narrow way of thinking can cause some people to become overly defensive and prone to misinterpreting the words and actions of those around them. This makes them sensitive to an extent where they regularly believe that they're under some form of criticism or attack. People living with this obsession can become highly alert to any slight hint, real or imagined, that implies a lack of respect towards them. These illusions can be interpreted from what they believe is an offensive look or a disparaging remark. Face-sensitive troublemakers tend to misinterpret trivial things as somehow being personal and so a direct challenge to their honour, pride or reputation. Although some people from Western cultures can dismiss face as being unnecessary and overcomplicated social baggage that impedes free communication, face is still a dominant part of life in most patriarchal old world cultures. Often in cultures where the extended family's reputation and success are more important than that of an individual, losing face has the added pressure of bringing shame onto one's family. Some societies and cultures still have unequal status for men and women. In some of these, a woman seen admonishing or insulting a man in public will likely cause that man to feel as though he's dramatically lost face, even if the man concerned originally instigated the trouble. For some chauvinistic type of men, this is all the self-justification they need to seek retribution of some sort or to escalate the attack. The general rule regarding face and knowing how to be safe in your space is to never dent a potential troublemaker's pride, especially in public. When a person feels that they're losing face, that feeling can become all-consuming and distracting. If a customer experiences a rush of blood from bad service at a hotel or restaurant and angrily bangs their fist and yells at the reception staff or waiter, they can cause their target to lose face to their co-workers. If this scene is done to a manager in front of their staff and customers, they'll lose a lot of face. Generally, when this happens to a person, the only recourse their ego allows them is to be defensive or aggressive towards whomever they feel is responsible, as we discussed last week. Mostly, when someone feels as though they're losing face, their attention will be fixated on their own personal justifications and excuses, and not on the problem at hand. A face-saving way of resolving a conflict like this would be talk to the manager concerned quietly and privately. In the majority of cases, a problem dealt with discreetly has more chance of being resolved satisfactorily because the person concerned and their face are in their comfort zone or space. Remember, never rebuke or scold a person in public where they might feel stupid or emotionally exposed. This is where it's critical to be diplomatic. For instance, if a young woman is in a nightclub and someone she doesn't want to know about either makes advances towards her or asks her for a dance, it's very important for her to tactfully and immediately terminate the encounter. The reason why it's important for them to break contact straight away is because the longer they interact with someone who targets them for unwanted attention, the more difficult it becomes to gracefully extricate themselves away, especially if the troublemaker happens to be the persistent type. The skill of this strategy is for them to take care with what they say and how they say it. They can't appear to be submissive and fearful because this makes them lose face. And they can't be aggressive either by saying, "Get on your bike, loser," because this will cause the troublemaker to lose face. The best tactic is for the woman to politely acknowledge them for the opportunity to dance or join them and say how she would rather not because she feels unwell or has an injury or must meet my grandmother, etc. The trick is to always look for a credible external excuse and not a personal reason to decline an unwanted offer. In this kind of situation, it would be vital that the young woman be subtle yet firm and to be sure that she's understood. The skill of this technique is to avoid offence while maintaining a neutral demeanour. Keep this scenario in mind because it can easily be adapted later on when your kids get a bit older and start to find themselves in awkward situations from being around people who consume drugs. In most situations in life, quiet diplomacy is the best way to keep face for everyone concerned because with matters relating to face, subtlety is the key. In situations where it's important to extricate yourself from interactions with potential troublemakers, it may feel insincere making up an excuse, but it could save embarrassment, a hurt ego and face. Sometimes there are circumstances in life where it becomes necessary to stand up for yourself. For example, if a confident child, well versed in knowing how to be safe in their space, found themselves being continually taunted by a troublemaker, a classy, face-gaining way to put the troublemaker in their place could be to say something along the lines of, "Hey, why are you giving me such a hard time? I'm just here playing with my friends and then you came over here and started being mean to me for no reason. That's bullying. Are you a bully? Is that what you're doing? My teachers told us that if any bigger kids start to bully us in the playground, we should report it straight away. All my friends here have seen you do it, so if you don't leave me alone right now, that's what I'm going to do." With some knowledge and an awareness of what others find offensive or insulting, it's still possible to be firm and to stand your ground in a way so that you gain face. Then, if the child's really confident, they could add, or you could come and join us if you promise to stay cool. It's up to you. This is what I mean when I say that knowing how to be safe in your space is a holistic approach to navigating through life towards our ultimate potential while minimizing the negativity, aggression and antics of the troublemakers of the world who seem hell-bent on remaining stagnant in their lives while sucking the energy or chi from ours. As you can see in that example, the response was measured, it was not personal or insulting. It also utilised the carrot or the stick because it involved making a face-gaining stand against the troublemaker as well as an incentive. The skill for achieving this is acquired from experience, and the good news is that by just becoming aware of this concept and talking it over with your child, you've already helped them to start gaining some of that experience. With face, one thing's for sure. Even though we may not see it, we'll certainly at some stage be influenced by it. Appreciating the machinations and nuances of face in everyday life allows us to understand why some people and troublemakers say or do what they do. It's often an important makeup of someone's subtext, as we discussed in the last lesson. I highly recommend that you gain some understanding about the subtle and complicated dynamics associated with face within your everyday interactions because it's very powerful knowledge. Another great benefit of being sensitive to face is that it allows you to develop stimulating and rewarding relationships with a wide range of people instead of only limiting relationships that are only with people who are just like you. Well, it's been another busy lesson, hasn't it? This week we looked at some of the differences between girl troublemakers and boy troublemakers. We examined the issues around physical violence. We looked at the exact moment when the threat of violence becomes actual violence. We distinguished the difference between self-defense and fighting. We looked at how much violence is it ethical to use and when. We examined a key black belt fighting concept and how it can be applied non-violently in everyday life. There were some simple and effective defense-only moves that anyone of any age can quickly learn and use. We looked at what passive bullying is and how you can teach your child to recognise and avoid it. We also examined the importance of developing your child's emotional intelligence. We looked at the difference between teasing, being rude, and bullying, and how to explain this to your child. We looked at how to gradually move away from a negative peer group so no one else notices. We discovered how to lose face and how to gain it and why it's so important. And we looked at what is the invisible treatment and how to teach it to your child. And then we looked at how to use the carrot or the stick when dealing with an unprovoked troublemaker. And there was a whole lot more. Your homework for this week is to understand the concept of the action point, which you can study in the short Be Safe in Your Space live video. Also, I'd like you to work on learning how to do some blocks by simulating with your child someone trying to grab you by the hair, punch or slap you across the face, or grab your shirt. Don't worry, as I mentioned, I'll send you some training video links to help you learn this. So next week is the last lesson in our 6-week program. In lesson 6, I want to tie everything in that we've touched on over the last few weeks so that you can help your child achieve the main aim of knowing how to be safe in your space. I'm talking about helping them to evolve into becoming the best person who they can possibly be. It's helping them move towards their own unique and great ultimate potential, whatever that might be. It's finding the confidence and self-esteem to hold their head high around others, to look at anxiety squarely in the eye, and to have the resilience and strength of character to move through adversity and challenges by becoming stronger and smarter. It's approaching others in the spirit of friendship and charity, as well as a desire to treat all the people in their life with dignity, kindness, and respect, and to have an ego that's a help and not a hindrance. In the meantime, if you have any comments or questions about today's lesson, please type them into the message box or post them on our Be Safe in Your Space Facebook community page or send me an email. So thanks for being here this evening. I look forward to hearing how you go with the lessons and homework from this week. So I'll be standing by for some questions in the chat box. So until then, I'll see you soon.